My name is Dr. Tyler Tolbert.
And I'm Dr. Soren Paape.
And you're listening to The Fix Podcast,
your source for all things implant dentistry.
Hello, and welcome to the inaugural episode of the Fix Podcast. So you may or may not know us. We'll certainly get into who we are. But like I said, this is the Fix Podcast. This is our first ever episode using a video medium, so definitely bear with us as we learn through this whole process. But we want to take some time out today to talk about what the Fix Podcast is, who we are, why you might want to watch the show and learn from us, and just sort of establish a basis of how the operations are going to be going here. I am Dr. Tyler Tolbert, and I'm here with my co-host, Dr. Soren Paape. How you doing, Soren?
Good, man. I'm so excited to be here. Yeah, we've been kind of juggling this video content, trying to get it going for us, and I think we finally hit it. So we're really excited for this next step here, and being on the first episode, I will, like Tyler said, discuss some different things that we'll be transitioning into. We're going to talk a little bit about us, our background, why you should listen to us, and you guys can hear our background, what CE we've done. And then we'll talk about what we're going to be doing differently with the Fix Podcast. So I think to start, Tyler, it'd be great to give an introduction, maybe talk a little bit about, what got you into dentistry, were you in a dental school, and kind of what transitioned you into the implant dental world.
Yeah, so that's a great question, a loaded question.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I've been through it enough times. So to start off, what got me into dentistry? So for me, in undergrad, I spent about the first 2 years of having a totally undeclared major, had no idea what I was going to do, just had a decent idea of some things that I was fairly good at, and certainly had some people pushing me in the realm of healthcare, engineering, and all kinds of other things. Definitely did not have a mind for engineering, but it was actually around, I think it was late freshman year, no, sophomore year, I guess that would make sense. I developed this really rampant and acute gum infection. So I was in college, and I guess I was really stressed, and I kind of fit this demographic for this particular condition. And I just noticed over a period of several weeks, I was having like really sore gums, and they were like bleeding as if I weren't brushing my teeth or something. I've always been really good about my teeth. And my breath started smelling bad, and I was like, okay, this is starting to get really weird. And I even noticed that like the areas between my teeth, which I didn't have a word for at the time, my papillae were shrinking and like actually sloughing off. So it was like really scary. And so I finally went to see the dentist at the clinic at University of Georgia, and they could immediately tell that something was way off. Ended up referring me out to a periodontist, and it was a very scary thing for me, being able to breathe air through my gums and like having bad breath and not feeling like smiling. It was actually taking a lot away from my college life. I'm like 20 years old and trying to have a great time, and I'm like ashamed of my mouth. So I pretty much had like advanced perio all of a sudden. And after seeing the specialist and going through around the treatment and things like that, which I don't even know what it was now because I had no vocabulary for it at the time, I saw them and then did some follow-ups with my like childhood dentist and stuff. And through all of that, just to kind of, I guess, take some of the stress out of it and the anxiety, instead of just talking about how my gums were dying, just to like talk about something else, I was asking them about why they became dentists, why they became periodontists, why they did what they did. And it gave me enough reason to, seriously consider it. And because I didn't really have a whole lot of other alternatives, I said, okay, well, why don't I just kind of lean into this, and maybe we can call this a turn of fate. Maybe me getting acute necrotizing ulcerative gingivitis is a sign that maybe I should do this. So really went deep into it, started listening to some dental podcasts. I didn't really know much about podcasts at all at the time, but I had started working at a dental lab called Newcraft Dental out of Athens, Georgia. And I was working in their CAD/CAM department, basically just scanning models, preparing cases in ExoCAD, and then pushing them off to the designer. So it was a very procedural type of thing, but it did kind of help me learn some things. But I was so quick at just like getting that very menial task down that I was usually done with all of my work halfway through the day. And so that engendered me to, seek out more things to learn about dentistry, because my boss was really cool. And he basically just told me, I don't care what you do, as long as you get all your work done and what you're doing with your time is relevant to dentistry, that's perfectly fine. Like, I come over there and you're studying dentistry, cool, we're good. So I got really deep into YouTube videos on dental surgeries and dental business, and it kind of occurred to me that, there was just a whole world of things that you could do as a dentist, either being a very dedicated clinician or a businessman or a business person, or just some mixture of the two. And through that process, I actually found the Share Praxis podcast, which was super, super influential for me. I had a few others that I had reached out to the shows to see if they needed any help, anything I could assist with, to be sort of like an intern, if you will. And Share Praxis got back to me. It was George Career that reached out to me with an email. I'd written him like a 2-page email, and I'm pretty sure he never actually read the whole thing. But he sort of took me under his wing and gave me a lot of busy work that the show was undertaking at the time. And so for the next 2 years, I was spending time evaluating people's dental practices, learning all about dental consulting, doing some coaching myself, actually coaching dental students on, getting out of school and going directly into dental business. And I was all dentalpreneur type of person. That was all I really cared about. But sometime into my junior summer, I think it was the summer after sophomore going to junior year, I got a scholarship through some of the connections I made through the podcast to do Implant Pathway, pretty much the entire series, sessions 1 through 4. And of course, nowadays, if you're familiar with Implant Pathway, they have tons of courses and continuums available, and they're really amazing, top-notch education right here in America. But at the time, I just did 1 through 4, and that was just taking people from 0 to 1 of implant placement. Obviously, I wasn't licensed at the time, so never actually ended up placing implants. But by the time I got to session 4 and I was walking around seeing all these surgeries and like really growing to understand it and just couldn't wait to do it myself, I realized that I kind of did have a little bit of a bug for clinical dentistry. It just wasn't fillings and crowns and all these things that I found to be, not so stimulating. And so I decided I wanted to do dental surgery and implants and things like that. Figured out pretty quickly that residency wasn't really going to be for me. So I really built my dental school career around learning as much as I could about implant dentistry and the business of dentistry as well. And neither of those things were really the forte of the Dental College of Georgia, or really, to be fair, any dental school for the most part, with maybe a few exceptions. And got really deep into that. And then Share Praxis Group had started a few dental implant practices around the country. So my first job right out of school was actually at Valley Dentures and Implants in Phoenix, where I did my first upper, lower, all-in-4 on my first licensed day of dentistry. So that was a really harrowing experience. I've learned a lot since then, and I certainly learned a lot on that day that I've been able to help people out with. And so I guess my story kind of became emblematic of someone that, if you have like a really good vision before you want to get out of school, there's a lot of really amazing things you can do that people would usually assume that you can't do that early on in your career, with caution, of course. So yeah, that was my time out in Arizona. Spent almost a year there until I decided to start a practice back here in Atlanta. So moved back to Atlanta, where I'm from originally. I'm actually from Macon, Georgia, but it's all the same. So moved back here, started Peachtree Dentures and Implants, been there for a little over 2 years. And so that's been, me running my own shop and, really getting the experience of learning the ins and outs of full arch dentistry without really having anyone else there to help you. When I was at Valley, I was there with Dr. Alyssa Mancini, who was certainly a mentor to me and helped bail me out of a lot of really tough cases. And, once you kind of break out and start doing this stuff on your own, now you have to learn all the lessons the hard way. And that was extremely educational, sometimes very frustrating, harrowing, scary, all that. But all in all, I couldn't be more thankful for it. And so through that process, Soren and I also started the Full Arch podcast, which some of you may be familiar with. That's something that, we have a fairly niche audience, but we have fans all over the world, people who, had followed us through our journey doing all kinds of different CE, and had a whole lot of listeners that were just really into full arch. And the thing about it was very limited to an audio only medium. So in making this show, we wanted to branch out a little bit and add video components and all that. But we'll get into the dynamics of the show itself a little bit more. But just to talk a little bit more about my background, things that I've learned from. So I already mentioned Implant Pathway. I also went through the Full Arch Club, continuing with Dr. Bernardo Nunes de Sousa. So the first course was in Porto, Portugal, where I learned some advanced full arch techniques like palatal approach, transsinus, a modified transnasal technique from the Vanderlim technique that a lot of people are familiar with, and pterygoids as well. But it was very conceptual and working on models and then watching a surgery. Super inspired by that. Really opened up a lot of horizons for me, and we'll talk about that some more too. I've also taken some case acceptance courses with the Closing Institute, did things like that. Learning more about dental business and case acceptance, which of course is an important part of full arch dentistry, where you're selling these big cases. The Texas Implant Institute with Dr. Clark Damon and the late and great Dr. Rick Klein, God rest his soul, where I learned a little bit about zygomatic implants, a bit about pterygoid implants, and just general fundamentals. And we would, go there with some of the other doctors in our group. And, that was a beautiful educational experience. And, all in all, I think I've probably done, 300 or 400 hours, actually now, if you can include some of the digital stuff, like 600 hours worth of CE and implants and full arch. And so I really have a passion for taking all that information, disseminating it, distilling it down to something that's, palatable for an audience, so you can quickly pick it up and figure out if you want to go to a course, if it's going to be beneficial to you, and ultimately, implement it in your office. So that's something really fun. Couldn't be more excited about, doing that with a video medium. And some other books that I really enjoy, a few of them are behind me. So we got Remote Anchorage, Dr. Dan Holtzclaw, Zero Bone Loss Concepts. I think I have the digital versions. That hasn't made it onto the bookshelf just yet. A couple Zygo books. There's a whole lot out there. Carl Misch's Modern Implant Dentistry, as well as the Complications book, is one that, I keep handy all the time. And then as far as things that I do in my office, so I've always worked in full arch implant specific offices. So the one in Arizona and the one I'm currently in Atlanta. So really the bulk of my procedural mix is full arch fix. So I've done a whole lot of hybrids, several hundred cases that I've documented, done some overdentures as well, probably more than 100 arches-ish. I do some single implants and things like that. And I think I've cut a grand total of 6 crowns in the past 2.5 years. It's a lot more than I ever wanted to. I don't think any of them were ever entirely voluntary. They were just sort of necessary for the situation. But I'm going to try and keep those numbers down. Hopefully this next year we can keep it below 1. So, but yeah, I think that's pretty much sums it up. I'd say on a weekly basis, probably doing anywhere from 3 to 7 fixed arches a week, so nothing totally crazy, but it is steady, and I'm able to apply a lot of new concepts pretty quickly. And then production level, in this type of model, it can vary a lot. But last year, I did myself about $2.3 million worth of surgical production. So yeah, I think that's a lot.
Yeah,
for
man,
me.
that's awesome.
Yeah. So how about you kind of run through the same gamut? Unless you have any questions about my background, I'd be happy to flesh that out.
Yeah. Well, I could jump in. It's funny because my background's going to be very similar to Tyler's. We've followed a very similar path, and you'll hear a lot of overlap. But what's different for sure is what got us into dentistry. I went to University of Wisconsin-Madison for undergrad, and I initially went there for computer science. I was trying to figure out, I was big into computers. I built my own computer at the age of 12. It triple booted Linux OS and
you should have
Windows.
Been a crypto billionaire, man. You went the wrong
Yeah, I know. I would.
Sorry.
I might have, but I was super into that. However, when I got to college and I started coding, I was like, I don't know if I like this coding thing. And computer stuff was more of it was fun for me. I didn't want it to turn into a job. But while I was in college and all through high school, I worked on these charter fishing boats. So we basically piloted charters out of Lake Michigan. And we would bring groups of 5 or 6 guys out every morning and every afternoon to fish for king salmon, rainbow trout, lake trout, stuff like that. And one day we had a group of dentists on the boat. And this was the summer after my freshman year, when I was kind of starting to transition out of computer science and trying to figure out another option. And they kind of were just leaning into it. They're like, hey, you should really check out dentistry. I mean, of course, it didn't help that the guy pulled up in a brand new BMW, and he owned a couple offices. I think he was doing very well. But he talked about the lifestyle piece and how he worked 4 days a week or whatever, and got to spend a lot of time with his family. And I was like, man, that sounds kind of nice. I'd love to get involved in that. So I started shadowing some dentists, and honestly, the dentists I shadowed weren't the best dentists to see, but for some reason I still was like, yep, this is what I want to do. And I started working at the local free dental clinic at UW-Madison, and just really kind of stepped on the gas as far as getting my grades where they needed to be for dental school, studying for the DHC. I had a similar job as yours, where I worked in school, the physics department, but I was able to just listen to podcasts while I was working. And, I would just cruise through Mark Costas podcasts. Okay. What is it? Dentalpreneur. Yeah. That's where I got involved with Shared Practices podcasts. I listened to all of Shared Practices podcasts. I did the course that they had at the time, the business course. What was it called? Do you remember?
The Ownership Accelerator.
Yeah, the Ownership Accelerator.
I was a beta tester for that one.
Yeah. So I did that before I even got to dental school, and I was just gung-ho about dental business. I'm like, if I do this, I'm going to get out, start a dental office, and get ripping. And, then I ended up getting in dental school. I went to Marquette.
interject just a little bit.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh wait, you're about to talk about getting into dental school.
Yeah.
Okay. Keep going. I'll interject later. I was
All
at the wrong
right.
part of the timeline. Go ahead, please.
So, I went to Marquette for dental school, and I was like immediately planning on going oral surgery. So all my first year, second year, I was just glued to the library. I knew I had to be, in the top of the class if I wanted to get in. Didn't really have a social life at all. Just studied a lot. And then I was studying for the oral surgery exam, the CBSE, which is basically step one of the med school exams. And I just got to a point where I'm like, man, I don't have a life. All I'm doing is studying. It's just study. And I'm like, do I want to go back to school? And I had done some externships at this point. So I'd seen the rotations in oral surgery, and I was like, I just don't know if this is what I want to do for the next 4 to 6 years. And I'm also kind of if I'm doing something, I put my full soul into it. So I was looking at 6-year programs with med school attached, and I'm like, if I do this, I'm going to do 2 more years. It's going to be med school, and then 4 years, and I'm going to get out when I'm 30. Actually, it'd be when I was 32.
Yeah.
32, yeah. And I'm like, I just don't know if that's what I want to do. And I actually jumped on a call with Tyler.
Okay, this is where I want to interject. I want to make sure that I was a part of your story. So please.
Yeah. Okay. So I called Tyler up, and I'm like, hey man, what do you think? I'm thinking about oral surgery, but I'm really into the business side of dentistry. And I think Tyler just gave me some words of wisdom where if he was like, man, I know a lot of people that own practices that make more than oral surgeons do, and the lifestyle's better or something like that. And I'm in my head, I'm like, okay, so if I do 6 years, that's a lot of missed income in those 6 years. And I at that day, I remember just calling on my parents. I'm like, hey guys, I'm not doing oral surgery. I'm doing
No way. Oh, that's great.
I'm doing general dentistry, and I'm going to see where that takes me. And at this point, I think this is when I reached out to Richard Lowe at Shared Practices, and I bugged him over and over and over and over again until finally he's like, hey, why don't you, I just was asking for any kind of role with Shared Practices. And I ended up doing assisting work for him, which in hindsight was not fun. It was every morning we got up at 5 o'clock. I'd go over his day for 30 minutes or something like that. But I learned a ton. I learned a lot, and I got to be involved in the initial stages of Shared Practices implant dentistry path. I went with Richard to Austin Davis's office, where we were there for 3 days just watching surgery. And then I helped Richard with starting his office up, which was one of the first, implant offices that we had. And me and Tyler went to Austin's office to recorded a bunch of fixed surgeries. And this is when I was like, okay, this is what I want to do. I love this. I love surgery. I love being able to just change someone's life in a day. It was just being able to watch, how someone transition through the surgery, get up and have a new set of teeth. I was like, this is so freaking cool. So I dove headfirst in. I was like, you know what? This is what I want to do. I'm going to get as much surgical experience as I can in dental school. I'm going to get as much full arch experience as I can in dental school. And I did that. I finished all my requirements, D3 year. And at my school, Marquette, we were able to then work in an outside clinic. So my whole D4 year, I just worked under an oral surgeon. We would do cases in his office from 8 to 5 every day. So I did a lot of thirds, extraction, stuff like that. And then also some crown and bridge and whatever. And then after at 5 o'clock every day, we would go to the hospital, and he would round out of 4 hospitals where we just dentulated people. And he was amazing to me. His name is Dr. Hikiliana, Dr. G, out of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And he was just a wonderful mentor. He let me do everything under the sun. He would just assist for me. And, looking back on it now, I was like, man, how did he have so much patience? Because when I go and train doctors, I'm just kind of sitting there jumping at the bit to get in there. And he just let me struggle away and make sure that I knew what I was doing. And I took out, thousands of teeth in a year in dental school, because every day we were probably doing, 4 or 5 edentulations, and it was just such a wonderful experience. So while I was doing that, I also would drive to Indianapolis and do all of the conversions that Richard were doing in his office. So when I graduated dental school, I had done thousands of extractions, tons of conversions, and I was ready to go. And right out of dental school, I jumped into Denver, started Denver Dentures and Implants, and we, have a I think it's one of the best implant offices in Denver. That's my opinion. I'm sure other, yeah, that's, it's biased, but, I am very proud of what we've accomplished there. My office is pretty similar to Tyler's in that we probably do like around 10 to 15 arches a month consistently. That falls right around like 250,000 a month in production. Last year, our first full year open, we did 2.5 million. And so we have a really good, production base, and I'm really happy with how the office has done. I'm really happy with the experiences I've had there, and I get to work with people like Tyler every day, which is pretty exciting. But, that's kind of my background, how I got involved in implant dentistry, and I can talk a little bit about, some of the CE and stuff I've done to prepare me. We'll probably do an episode specifically on like how to get into it, but this is just some of the stuff I did, and on top of all the extractions. And that's my thing. When people ask me like, how do you start getting involved in this, I'm like, you got to know how to take teeth out quickly. Mm-hmm. You need to know how to flap quickly. You need to know how to alveolo quickly and efficiently. I mean efficiently and well. Like when I say quickly, I don't mean just get in there and start breaking off buccal plates. I mean, it just needs to be efficient. And if you can do that, then the implants are the easy part, I think. If you get all the teeth out clean, alveolo, once you get to the implants, it's like, okay, this is like the fastest part of the whole surgery. But, I've taken very similar CE to Tyler. I think my first one that I don't think Tyler was involved in was a CE course by Travis Kendall. And it was all on digital dentistry, which at the time we weren't doing digital. We were doing everything analog, but I was really curious about this digital world everyone was talking about. And this was, 3-4 years ago now. So it was even newer then. That was like right when photogrammetry was coming out. I remember someone talking about photogrammetry and I was like, what the hell is photogrammetry? And I got to see it, at this course, and I'm like, oh damn, like I really want to start getting involved in that. But then I also was like, oh damn, to get into digital, it's like another $100,000. So that's gonna, it's gonna take a while to get into that. So then
changed so much since you even just took that course. It's crazy.
I know, it's super crazy. But it was a good, good foundation, good building blocks to getting into it. But then I went to the Full Arch Club. I didn't go to the same one Tyler did, but I did go to the one in Porto. And then I went to Brazil to place a bunch of implants there. And that's where, I also learned palatal approach, pterygoids. I was pretty consistently doing just traditional all-on-4. I was really happy with my cases, but I wanted something to enable me to do more cases and to bail me out if to get a failed implant here or there. I've done the Closing Institute. I did that with Tyler, learning how to sell treatment, which is critical for this type of dentistry. I've done the Texas Implant Institute with Clark Damon and Rick Klein, who, unfortunately recently passed away. Everybody's pretty in shock about that. So, he was such a great clinician and I learned a lot from him. So I'm happy to have known him while he was here. And I've done the Oral Conscious Sedation by Docs, and I've done the California Implant Institute, which is like 300 CE hours online. I've received my fellowship of the International Congress of Oral Implantology, the FICOI, and I'm now working on getting my diplomat of the ABOI, which I think also comes with the FAAID or whatever that is. So hopefully end of this year, maybe end of next year, I'll have a lot of letters behind my name, but that's not the important part. The important part is being able to offer good treatment to my patients. And the reason that I'm pursuing some of these avenues is so, maybe I can, more patients are like, hey, this guy obviously has done a lot of implants, I want to go to him. And as I said, I think my team does some really good work in Denver. So the more patients we can treat, the happier I am, and the more people that can be eating steaks instead of dentures coming out when they're eating like anything. Yeah. Favorite books? and I've read a ton of dental business books that are wonderful. But favorite books around implants, I would say, same as Tyler. Mish's Contemporary Implant Dentistry is a great one. His Complications is a great one. Zero Bone Loss Concepts is wonderful. Pterygoid Implants by Dan Holtzclaw is great. And we'll have Dan on the podcast here at some point. Remote Anchorage is a wonderful book. And I'm guessing we'll have, a bunch of the authors that are on there on this podcast. And so I think that sums up a lot of my story, how I got involved in implants, what I'm currently doing, why you should listen to anything we have to say. The fact of the matter is, our goal with this podcast is to disseminate as much information as we can and be as transparent as we can. And we want, I don't think every single dentist should be doing implants, definitely not. But I think that, I want you to have an idea of what the benefits are of doing implants, but also what the negatives are, so you as a clinician can decide if this is a path that you want to take. And it's not an easy one. It's a very hard one. It comes with a lot of patient management. It comes with a lot of failed implants. And I think that's probably one of the biggest things is so many people are like, they jump in and do a fixed arch or 2 fixed arches or whatever, and then all of a sudden they come back and they have an implant failure and they're like, oh my God, what do I do now? And it's like, okay, if you get involved in this and you're placing hundreds of implants a month, even if 5% fail, that's still 5 implants, 5-10 implants a month. Yeah. So it happens, and it's part of the game. You just have to be prepared to take those, and you can't beat yourself up too much. But yes, that is my background. I think a good transition now would be, Tyler, why don't you tell everybody what the Fix podcast is? Let's talk about what we're going to be changing from the Full Arch podcast and why you should listen to us.
Yeah, for sure. So, I think a good segue for that is something that we're kind of remiss in talking about with our experience and kind of what makes us hopefully someone worth listening to. And I think that as part of the dynamics of our job, so we've been working for the past couple of years within the same DSO, that'd be Shared Practice Group, and we were both clinical directors for the group. And so what that really encompassed was we were responsible for making all of the educational material and onboarding material that every doctor that came in to the group would have to go through. And we track their progress through it and, kind of see how that was landing with them. And we'd host these monthly calls where we talk with all the doctors about how some of that stuff was going, questions they had, things like that. And ultimately, most importantly, we'd have our quarterly retreats, and we'd teach, anywhere from 30 to 40 doctors at a time, doing model exercises and going through different presentations and case presentations. So we're very familiar with teaching these things, but our most important function, I think, was traveling all around the country, going to all these different offices. And I think right now the group is around 36. There's been over 40 doctors that have, kind of come in, some of whom have come out, but we've seen people at so many different stages of their careers. And we've actually gone into these offices for their first, second, third surgeries, or maybe if it was a really complex surgery that had failed, it was a case that had failed, and we had to go in and revise it. We had to save some things. And so we've seen people go from having placed less than 10 implants to doing full arch. We saw people that had placed more than 1,000 implants to doing full arch. Seen people that have been doing overdentures for a long time and had to work to transition them to fixed. People that have been doing dentistry for 20 years, people that have been doing it for 2 years. And so we interface with people that had just about every type of entry point that you can imagine into implant dentistry and got them, up to that certain level. Or if they didn't get to that level, we kind of saw the trends along the way that kind of stopped people, mental obstacles people had, physical obstacles people had. And we saw people get really, really jazzed about implant dentistry and then get totally disenfranchised by it after having a few, early obstacles in that first, 6 months, which can be really hellish trying to do this for the first time. And we'd seen, seasoned people who, really knew surgery still kind of struggle with it. We've seen people do amazing. So we've just seen all the different incomes and outcomes of people trying to do full arch. And I think that's made us acutely adept at this. And certainly we're not, the best people in the world to be teaching this kind of thing. But one thing I do like is that we're still both pretty early on in our journey. but we've also made it pretty far in a short period of time. And so what makes that easy, I think, for people that are trying to learn this is, Soren, you and I, we both learn from people that have been doing surgery for a long time. Is over time, as someone gets really proficient at this and they do a whole lot of cases, they kind of forget about some of those early pitfalls that they faced. They forget about the really hard lessons they had to learn super, super early on, doing just the most fundamental stuff, pulling teeth, laying flaps, getting a patient numb, right? But that kind of stuff has not only happened somewhat recently for us, we can still very patently remember not having any idea what we were doing, but we've also seen so many other people be at that stage. And at any given time, there's people that have, reached out to us asking us questions about how to approach different cases. And I mean, I think between the two of us, we've probably seen thousands of cases just from, the early initial records appointment, going in, remoting into their computers, reviewing that, doing the surgery, following up on it. So we have experience beyond what we've actually done with our two hands. And we've had experience going into different offices we've never been into before. And, if you've never done that before, it is an incredible experience because it can be really challenging. You don't know where things are. It's not your home environment. You have to learn to think on your feet and adapt. And honestly, that's what full arch is all about, really. As we kind of get into this, you'll really get that sense of things. But yeah, so to kind of transition to what we want to do with the Fix podcast. So we want to take, all those strengths that we have that allow us to, be able to teach this to people and ask important questions. And, what we want to do is put it into the most easily digestible but very educational format that we can imagine. So I think that trying to do this with audio only, just doing it in podcast format, it's stimulating. It's a great thing to listen to on your way to work or during a workout or whatever. But if you can't actually see the things that are being done, if you can't visualize them, they can really only go so far, because ultimately you want to see a surgery, you want to see how a case is done. It's very hard to talk about what the palatal approach is if you don't actually show a person the palatal approach. And so by opening up this video content, for one thing, it helps us spread our message to many different platforms. Some people just don't really care for audio only podcasts in the first place, but now you'll see us on Facebook, you'll see us on Instagram, you might see us on TikTok and Twitter or X or whatever it is. Because we're going to be sort of chopping all these videos up into like easily digestible, anywhere from 10 seconds to a minute long videos with captions and screen captures and, little videos we take of us actually doing model work. And so I think that's really going to drive home a lot of the things that we want to talk about. In addition, whenever we're having guests on that maybe aren't so equipped for video recording and have nice microphones and things, we actually are going to be shipping equipment to them just to kind of raise the overall quality of these recordings. I mean, we recorded with people in the past that, it might be in a random public area with not so great Wi-Fi, and we're just using some wired headphones for our audio and our audio. And that, while there might be great content, it's sometimes at the expense of our listeners. And so we wanted something that would be really easy to listen to, really fun to watch. They would just be all the more educational and really drive these points home. And, Soren did mention the concept of full transparency. So that's something that we started, with the Full Arch podcast. And what that really meant for us was that we didn't really have any affiliations beyond the group itself that would create biases for us and the sort of guests that we would have on. We never took any money for the podcast. We never did any ads, any sponsorships or anything like that. One thing that's a little bit different about the Fix podcast is we are going to be doing ads. We are going to be having sponsorships in a few different ways. So you'll be seeing, pre-roll, mid-roll, ad, post-roll. So that's like little ads that happen before, during, and after the show at times, and we'll work very hard to not make that annoying or at least easily skippable if it must be done. We'll also have exclusive episodes with people that are trying to promote a course or a particular product or things like that, and you'll be very well aware of that. There will always be disclaimers about where those biases are and who we're talking to. And then we may also be setting up some recurring episode relationships with different people that want to come in and maybe do like a monthly or quarterly episode or something, just catching up with what their company is doing. But what's really important to us is that while we are doing that to help grow the show and further develop it and pay for all this fancy equipment that we're using to make this a whole lot more entertaining, we never want people to think for even a second that is actually biasing us towards a certain opinion. We're always going to be very transparent about exactly what we think about a product, the good, the bad, and ugly, and we'll always be letting you guys know what sort of relationships we have so you can sort of interpret that and understand what those biases are. So that's just something really important. I want this to be, we both want this to be the sort of educational resource that we would want if we were first starting out, or, really any other phase looking to just get into full arch or really optimize your full arch, or, really any other phase looking to just get into full arch or bias source and workflows should support techniques, not the other way around. We've been to courses and seen shows and things like that where, it all kind of becomes about, this is how you're going to do the dentistry so that you can use this service, right? There's some kind of catered service. We're going to pay some fee to have this fabricated and this prefabricated and this design and all this wrapped in. And we find ourselves kind of going through a whole bunch of hoops to do something that's not really fundamentally necessary to full arch dentistry. And so we keep things extremely simple, as we talk through our surgical workflows or restorative workflows. These things work with any array of products. It's never really a specific to any one brand or anything like that. We'll talk about pros and cons of different brands, but we never are teaching this with the intent of you need to do this exactly the way we do with the products that we use and things like that. That's not the kind of show we want to have. So I think that's a couple different ways that it'll be different. We also really want to open it up more to the audience. We tried doing that with the Full Arch podcast here and there, but I think we never really quite had the follow through that it needed. So what we're doing is you guys will be seeing a website that we're preparing where you can actually submit some questions about different topics that you want to discuss, questions about episodes you already saw. If you have a case that you want to share, we're going to have a whole form where you can upload case photos with records, pre and post-op panos, or just a pre-op pano if you're looking for, advice on an approach for a given case, photos, things like that. So we can actually come on here and you can have this posted anonymously or not, it doesn't matter to us, and we can kind of walk you through how we would do that case. If you even wanted to be on the show and we could discuss cases and other issues that you're having, that's something we could do. And so, I think this is really going to open the floor for a ton of really awesome content that people are really fiending for. And it's just going to be able to deliver so much more than just, an audio only podcast where you just check every Friday and see what we're talking about this week. This is going to be a much more live feedback based show. And we look forward to, interfacing with what will now be the Fixed podcast audience. So super excited about that. But did I miss anything there, Soren?
The acronym? What does Fixed podcast stand for?
I probably should have started there.
Yeah, it's okay.
The outline title. So the Fixed podcast, it is an acronym, FIXED. So that stands for Frameworks for Implant Excellence in Every Dentition. And so we're really trying to open up the concept of what we really mean, by, instead of just talking about full arch dentistry, this is, anything that has, an implant uses anchorage. It's anything fixed. It's the idea that we're going to fixate something in the mouth that's going to enable it to do X, Y, Z. So we'll still be talking full arch. Full arch fixed is really but we'll also be talking about overdentures. We'll be talking about single implants. We will also be talking about grafting, GBR, soft tissue, hard tissue grafting, things like that. All the things that really factor into, what we do, because it's not all just about full arch. And so that's something we kind of want to break out of and be a little bit more generalist about it, because the truth is that when you're doing these cases, so many things can come up for you, so many challenges. Soren, you talked about failure. Failure is absolutely a critical part of doing this. You have to be willing to face failure, where you're going to find yourself just running all over the country, running away from your failures.
Yes.
And so there's a lot of skills that you may not think that are really that necessary for full arch. There are some things in the philosophy of all on 4, or as other people refer to as all on X, where, hey, we're avoiding grafting. We don't need it. Or we're doing a palatal approach, so we don't need to build anything out. And, all of most of these techniques that we talk about, you're taking the first blush at a case. You're doing this for the first time. You haven't faced that failure yet. But when you do run into failure, you do run into complications, you find out there's a lot of other skills that are adjunctive to doing full arch implant dentistry. And if you don't have some of those things, you can run into situations where you just kind of shrug your shoulders and don't really know where else to go. And I think it's really important that, when you're trying to do this at volume, you're taking on a whole lot of full arch cases. Complications are just going to be a part of the game. It's going to be something you're always going to be dealing with no matter what you do. And having adjunctive skills that can bail you out and allow you to shift the plan and take a case through to completion is really important, because if you only know how to do it successfully and predictably, and you only know how to do the case and see it through the end and then restore it, that's not really enough. You have to know how to problem solve. You have to know critical thinking. You have to know how to move if your plan A doesn't work like plan A is supposed to work, and you have to go to plan B, C, D. We'll both be sharing some cases where we had to do multiple revisions on cases. I think Soren has a record where he fixed a case about 6 or 7 times, and every single surgery looks immaculate, but it just would not go for whatever reason. I think we finally resolved that one. So
yeah, it did.
But for now, at least, right? I mean, you might get more down the road. But yeah, so we really just wanted to open this up to all the sorts of techniques that can be really useful in implant dentistry and all the different disciplines that play into that, because none of them are any less important than the others. We don't want to just talk about your cookie cutter all in 4 case, because I think people are getting pretty familiar with that. So yeah, we want to talk about the complex stuff too.
For sure. I think I want to point out too, what Tyler's talking about adjunctive procedures, that this is what, gets people in trouble as far as like, if you don't know how to do some of these adjunctive things, then your case ends up in the hands of maybe a specialist who then, maybe already thinks that general dentists shouldn't be doing these kind of procedures. So getting like a good, well-rounded education prior to starting this and being fully prepared for anything that comes your way is important for, us as general dentists having the ability to even do these cases. And I think that that's really important, to not jump into these until you're ready. And getting a full rounded education prior to jumping in is definitely critical. I think Tyler hit everything that we wanted to discuss about the podcast and what we'll be changing, what we'll be doing. I do want to point out that, something that we do offer is on our individual Instagrams. I know Tyler does a little bit, but one of my big things is I share every single case that I do. It does good, bad, ugly, failures, every single full arch that I've done. It's been posted on my Instagram, so you can see what all of my cases look like. I'm not hiding behind anything. I want you guys to see what it looks like for, a general dentist to be doing these cases, and what good cases look like, what it looks like to fix these cases. I will do everything I can to be as transparent as possible on those social media platforms. Now, there's some patients who don't want me to show their picture of like the before and after, but I can show, their panos, their CTs after the cases. And, you can find my Instagram. It's Dr. Soren Paape. I know Tyler's is Dr. Tyler Tolbert, and we'll be posting all of our cases on there. And then as far as the Fix podcast goes, I'm sure we'll be relaying a lot of those cases onto that platform as well. Additionally, as Tyler said, we'll be hitting TikTok, we'll be hitting Instagram Reels. Hopefully you'll be seeing us pop up on your For You page. We'll see. But our goal is to get this information out to as many dentists as possible, so those dentists can make a decision whether or not they want to get into implant dentistry. And if they do get into implant dentistry, I want them to be as prepared as possible. And to do that, we will be having all of the top dogs on this podcast, so they can relay as much of their gold nuggets, their best tips to you guys as possible, so you can be as prepared as possible going into this journey. But yeah, I think that, that covers everything. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about, Tyler?
Yeah, no, I think you summed it up well. I would just add that, in terms of the things that we'll be discussing, the people we're going to be having on, we kind of tread this line of making this show something that's going to be palatable for a widespread audience with different levels of experience and reps under their belt. But we want this to be something that's valuable from the person that is just thinking about doing this and trying to learn a few, surgical principles, all the way to someone that's been doing this a while and is just trying to push it to the next level. I think where Soren and I both are is that we've gotten very comfortable in dealing with atrophic cases in the maxilla, dealing with tough cases in the mandible, with hourglass mandibles and thin mandibles, things like that, some grafting, things like that. We've waded our way into zygos as well, and so we're kind of getting into the far reaches of remote anchorage and handling really difficult cases, be they primary cases that are being treated for the first time, or secondary or revision cases, or tertiary cases where even a revision has failed too. We're both getting pretty comfortable with that, and so we want this to be something that is beneficial to everybody. We want all the experts to be able to come on here too and still be able to glean some little nuggets of information like you were talking about, and totally open-minded to the different guests that you guys would want to see on here, the content that you want to hear about. This is a show that we want to keep rolling for a long time, and just build a wealth of information that's going to further enrich our little full arch community. And I think that we've made a lot of friends in this industry, some of the best doctors not just in the country but the world, and there's a lot of integrations that can come from that. So if you're listening to this and you're well-to-do in the full arch world, please do reach out to us at the fixpodcast@gmail.com with any inquiries or questions you have, any ideas you might have about collaboration. We're very open to that and very excited about making as much content as we can, and just spreading the word to people, and enriching this wonderful world of dentistry that we engage in, which is unquestionably the most life-changing dentistry that you can do, not just for your patients but for you as well, depending on what it is that you're looking out for in your career, the goals that you have. There's a lot of amazing things that can come out of really diving deep into full arch, and so we want to help pave that path for everyone, and make it a little bit easier, so maybe you don't have to learn so many hard lessons. And so I think that pretty much sums it up. So
Perfect, man. I'm so excited to be releasing these episodes for you guys, and you should be hearing from us bi-weekly. We'll have episodes out every other week, at least to start, and then maybe going forward, we'll switch to every week. But again, if you want to contact us now, Tyler mentioned the email. My Instagram is Dr. Soren Paape. Tyler's is Dr. Tyler Tolbert. Feel free to DM us on those accounts, and please go follow us at The Fix Podcast. That's the Instagram handle as well. Thanks so much for listening to us today. If you made it this far, that I'm happy, and we will see you next time.
Thanks so much.